Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Truth and Liberty. I'm Richard Harris, your host. Folks, did you know that left-wing ideology is destroying the family in America? On our show today, I'm going to have a guest. His name is Delano Squires. He works for the Heritage Foundation, where he leads the research into family in America. You know, Democrats have been pushing since the 1950s for sexual, quote-unquote, freedom and free divorce in America. Today, they've successfully achieved enshrining in the law at the United States Supreme Court homosexuality and gay marriage as a constitutional right. And now they are pushing transgenderism, saying that children at any age have the right to actually choose their gender and undergo chemical and surgical mutilation in order to have a different apparent gender. These things are clearly contrary to God's plan and His design. In the beginning, God said in Genesis 1:27-28, God created man in His own image. In the image of God created He him. Male and female created He them. And God blessed them. So you see, God blessed the male and the female. Not some transitionary type, not some mutilated, configuration. And God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over everything that liveth and that moveth upon the earth. And then in the next chapter, God said in Genesis 2:24, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. In the Gospels, in Mark and in other Gospels, but in Mark chapter 10, Jesus talked about marriage and divorce. And He said, in Mark 10:6, He said, from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and shall cleave unto his wife. He's quoting what we just read out of Genesis. And they twain shall be one flesh, and they shall no more be twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. He even goes on to say that if anyone divorces his wife and marries another, he commits adultery. And if a woman divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. The Bible is so clear on these things, folks. Why did God create marriage? Do you know the Bible answers that question too in Malachi chapter 2, verse 13 through 16? It tells us that the primary purpose of human sexual relations and marriage is so that God can have a godly seed. Now that might be a surprise to you because in our culture today, we're taught everywhere we look that sex is all about pleasure, right? But that's not true. The fundamental purpose of sex is to have children. The Bible says in Malachi chapter 2, in verse 15, it says, did He make one, in other words, male and female one, if you look at the context, yet had He the residue of the Spirit, and wherefore one? That He might seek a godly seed. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously with the wife of his youth. For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that He hateth putting away. That's also translated divorce. He hates divorce. For one covers violence with his garment, saying, the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that you deal not treacherously. You see, even back in ancient Israel, men would divorce their wives and they would pretend like it was God who was telling them to do it. And so it is today as we think, oh, my wife is this or my husband is that, and God's telling me to leave them. God's telling me to divorce them. Oh, it doesn't matter. I married the wrong person. Oh, I'm in the wrong body. Oh, I have these confused desires. But the Bible says that sex, the act of sex, must be confined to the marriage covenant relationship. And that marriage is one man and one woman for life, a sacred covenant. 1 Corinthians 6:18, flee fornication. 1 Thessalonians 4:3, for this is the will of God, even your sanctification, that you should abstain from fornication. So leftist ideologies say, no, 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 no. Marriage is old-fashioned. Marriage is outdated. Marriage puts women in bondage, holds them captive. They're subjugated. Women need to be able to get out of marriage. And we need easy divorce. We need free divorce. Divorce without cause. No fault divorce. Oh, sex, you don't need to wait till marriage. In fact, you should have as much sex as possible before marriage so you can be sure you're going to enjoy the one you're with. Right? These lies of the devil. And now we're at, and it doesn't have to be a man and a woman. It can be a man and a man or a woman and a woman. Or now they're saying any number of different combinations, even all at the same time. And by the way, people that sell their bodies for sex, that's our right to do that. Yeah. And we ought to protect their rights. These ideologies and policies, they're even pushing sex with children now, right? These things have done great harm to the family in America. The divorce rate in America now is at about 60% of all marriages end in divorce. Marriage rates are dropping. In other words, fewer people are getting married. And furthermore, the childbirth rate is dropping too. Americans now are not even having enough children to maintain our population. We only have about 1.8 children per marriage now in this country. That's not even enough to sustain ourselves. 25% of all children live in single-parent homes in America. I've got a chart on this I'd like to show you. The United States leads the world in this category at 23% as of 2019. It's even more than the UK. It's even more than France. It's even more than Canada and Germany. The average in the world is about 7%. This is an abomination. It's shameful for our country. 1 out of 4 children don't have both parents in the home. Do you know, the thing that we've done in our country with these left-wing ideologies, we bought into this idea of free love, right? That sex is love. We bought into this and it ought to be free, right? There's no restrictions. This doctrine only thinks about the pleasure of the people having the sex, and it does not consider the children that are produced by the action. It's incredibly selfish. This idea of, and it's also what birth control and abortion are all about. Abortion is all about free sex. It's not about a woman's right to choose. It's not about women's health care. It's about free sex. Easy divorce, no-fault divorce also prioritizes the emotional desires of adults over the rights and needs of children to a stable home with 2 parents of the opposite sex. Extramarital sex and easy divorce have caused a fatherhood crisis in our nation. The absence of fathers in the home has had incredibly damaging effects on the children of our country. The first and most stunning harm is the murder of innocent children in the womb. Over 60 million children, 60 million, have been killed in our country through this thing we call abortion. If men would actually believe that sex carries the duty of marriage and fatherhood, we would reduce abortion by 95%. But even those children that do survive the what would I call it now? The gauntlet called the womb. Those who survive the womb and actually get to be born in our country today, millions of them are left without the benefits of a father in the home. Fatherless children, listen to this, folks, have a risk factor of 2 to 3 times that of other children for dropping out of high school, for giving birth as a teenager, for becoming a juvenile delinquent. They have a dramatically increased risk of drug and alcohol abuse and addiction, of mental illness, of suicide, of poor educational outcomes. I mentioned teen pregnancy. Did you know half of all children who live with a single mother are living in poverty? Right. Democrats claim to care about poverty. Well, why don't you stop advancing fatherlessness and sexual irresponsibility? Okay, because fatherless homes, the children have a 5 to 6 times higher chance of being in poverty than children with both parents. Child abuse is also significantly more likely in single-parent homes. You'd think, the father's the abusive one and he's beating up the kids and abusing them. And not that that doesn't happen, but did you know that 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes, children who grew up in fatherless homes. 72% of adolescent murderers grow up without fathers. 60% of our rapists grew up in homes without fathers. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. You want to stop the homelessness crisis? Stop pushing sexual irresponsibility. Children from low income, listen to this stat. This is incredible. Children from low income two-parent families outperform students from high income single parent families in education and in other demographics. So a newsflash, Democrats, it's not about money, okay? Poverty does not cause social dysfunction. What causes social dysfunction is immorality and the broken family. Almost twice as many high achievers come from two-parent homes as single-parent homes, according to a study by Charles Keltering Foundation. 85% of all children that exhibit behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. This is as clear as can be. The cause of our problems today is the disintegration and the attack on the family. And the root of that attack is sexual immorality and the rejection of God's standards. And you think, oh, well, we need to attack those standards because women are at risk. Wrong. Of all violent crimes against women committed by inmates, a survey was done, about 65% of them were committed by boyfriends or ex-husbands compared to 9% by husbands. Girls that grow up with non-natal fathers, meaning men in the home who are not their fathers, boyfriends and stepfathers, are a higher risk of sexual abuse than girls living with their natural-born fathers. Daughters of single mothers are 111% more likely to have children as teenagers, 164% more likely to have premarital births, 92% more likely to dissolve their own marriages, and on we go. There was a study done of about 1,200 fourth grade students, and the researchers observed greater levels of aggression in boys from mother-only households. Do you hear this, guys? Okay, so this boy grows up in a single mom household because of the bad dad, right? And the facts are that he will grow, the chances are much higher that he will be aggressive against women and against others than if he had had a father in the home. The Scholastic Aptitude Test, SAT, scores have declined more than 70 points in the last 2 decades. Children in single-parent families tend to score lower on these tests than those in two-parent families. But despite this evidence, our culture is demeaning the role of men in the family. Everywhere you turn in culture, we look at TV, we look at movies, we look at music, we look everywhere, and men are being demeaned and put down, especially fathers. From an article from the website fathermatters.org and an article by Ray Williams called The Decline of Fatherhood and the Male Identity Crisis, we can find this to be true. In our society, the ridicule and demeaning rhetoric about manhood makes men likely to believe that they are invisible or irrelevant to their children's welfare, unless the only exception is financial support. There was a study of popular sitcoms by Timothy Allen Pelkey, and his colleagues concluded that fathers are generally shown in TV sitcoms to be immature, unhelpful, and incapable of taking care of themselves in comparison to other family members. They also found that fathers are frequently the butt of family members' jokes, while the intention may be humor here. The truth is they're depicting fathers as incompetent and objects of derision. Another study of best-selling children's picture books, researcher Suzanne Flannery Quinn found that of the 200 books analyzed, there were only 24 where the father appears alone and only 35 where the mother and father appear together. And then overwhelmingly, these books portray the male identity as negative, all right? In movies and films today, men are demonized, marginalized, objectified. One study by Nathanson and Young found this in TV and film. Found that they looked at The Simpsons as an example. You remember that that cartoon series. There they present the father, Homer, as chauvinistic, irresponsible, lazy, stupid, and his son Bart as mischievous, rude, and cruel to his sister. By comparison, the mother and daughter are presented as thoughtful, considerate, mild-natured. And this is how it is throughout TV and films. So guys, we've got to fix this. We've got to stop this as a country. We have to go back to God. We have to go back to the Word of God and His standards. Men, listen to me today. God has a calling on your life. He is calling you to more. He's calling you to better. He's calling you to higher. He's calling you to be responsible. Kids need you. Families need you. Women need you. Our country needs fathers and responsible husbands today. And I'm out of time in this monologue, but I just want to encourage everybody that's watching today to go to the Truth and Liberty website, truthandliberty.net, and get a copy of my book called The Calling to Manhood. It's about 60 pages, really easy to read. You can read it in an hour, where I talk about how God has designed men for a purpose, a calling to lead, a calling to fight, and a calling to work, to save our families and to save our country. If we don't answer this call today, men and women, if you don't support and help the men in your life to fulfill this calling that they're designed by God for, we cannot save America. It doesn't matter who the politicians are. It doesn't matter what we do in elections. Our families are the bedrock, and they are crumbling in front of our very eyes because of this leftist satanic assault. The idea of free divorce, marriage is outdated, irresponsible sex. We've got to stop this, guys, and only the Church of Jesus Christ can do it. So get a copy of my book today. We're going to take a little break now, and I'll be right back in about a minute and a half with our guest, Delano Squires. And as I mentioned, Delano works for the Heritage Foundation, one of the greatest think tanks in America. And he actually serves as the research fellow in the Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Human Flourishing. He's a frequent contributor on Blaze Media and has written and appeared on numerous shows, including Fox News and many others. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back with this incredible guest. Are you passionate about standing for truth in the culture, but don't know how to get started? Well, Truth and Liberty, our mission is to educate, unify, and mobilize the body of Christ to stand for truth in the public square. And as part of our mission, we provide you with an amazing array of resources on our website. And our website has just been revamped, remodeled, and retooled to be user-friendly. And I'm so excited about it because I believe that there's nothing like it out there anywhere. I want to encourage you today to go to truthandliberty.net and check out the Resources Center and the Get Equipped Center. On our Resources Center, you will find hundreds of links, hundreds of videos, articles, blogs, even America's original founding documents can be found on Truth and Liberty's Resources Center. It's searchable by topic, preset topic, or you can put in a custom search to find exactly what you need and what you're interested in. In the Get Equipped section, we link you to tools created by our strategic partners, including Pray, Vote, and Engage tools. We culture impact teams, civic action teams, biblical citizenship in modern America, biblical worldview training, and more. So go today to truthandliberty.net and find what you need to get equipped to stand for truth in the public square. All right, everybody, we're back here on Truth and Liberty. And as I mentioned, our very special guest today is Delano Squires. He's a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. And he works in, I believe it's called the Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Human Flourishing. He has written extensively on marriage and family in culture. And Delano, it's just a real honor to have you joining us today on Truth and Liberty.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, Delano, tell us a little bit about, just a little bit of your background here. How did you find yourself in this role at the Heritage Foundation?
Well, I can certainly say I didn't take the typical path to Heritage. So prior to coming here, I worked 15 years in local government in Washington, D.C., mainly in the area of technology access, so running programs that help low-income residents get access to low-cost internet, basic computer services. So I did that for a number of years, did work in public housing, been to D.C. jail 4 times, right, in terms of promoting different events. And then my last year in DC government was with the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. So it's not the typical profile of a heritage policy expert, but over the course of those years, I'd been writing extensively on issues related to marriage, family structure, fatherhood, race, culture. And it's that writing that opened doors for me
Yeah.
that eventually led me here to Heritage. So, in addition to my academic background in public policy, I also had the experience of writing for public consumption. So, it was a great fit. And now I get to do the things that I love on an everyday basis, and particularly, advocate for American families and the benefits of marriage.
Well, that's terrific. And I suspect that the work that you were doing, even though it was technology centered, gave you, a real opportunity to witness the disintegration of the family and its consequences there in Washington, D.C. But Delano, let's just dive in on this if we can. Charlie Kirk said, he said, get married, have children, build a legacy, pass down your values, pursue the eternal, and seek true joy. His message resonates with Gen Z and young Americans today, partly because they're hearing the exact opposite from mainstream culture. And here's a young guy standing up saying, no, do it the old-fashioned way. Get married and have kids. This is what life is all about. Let me ask you this. Is the family breaking down in our country today? What does the data say?
The answer, unfortunately, is yes. Right. A colleague of mine, we wrote a report together called Crossroads Report. Right. It's American life at the intersection of tradition and modernity. And what we found is that in 1950, about 70% of American households were headed by a husband and wife. Right. Today, it's about 47%. So it's less than half of households are composed of a husband and wife. So across the board, all of the statistics that relate to family flourishing point to a decline over the last half century. About 40% of American children are born to unmarried parents. About a quarter live with a single parent. The latter is the highest rate, certainly in the sort of first world. It might be in the world, right? A quarter of American children are raised by a single parent. So what we see again across the board is that compared to where we were decades ago, the American family seems to be in a state of decline. And one of the things another data point that you see is that people are waiting longer to get married. Right? So in 1980, the median age at first marriage was about 24 for a man, about 22 for a woman. The last I checked is about 31 and 29 respectively. So if America has had a marriage model in decades past, it was early and often. Right? So young people got married at younger ages, and more adults were married. And today it's less and later. So we've seen a decline in the marriage rate as well as increase in the age of first marriage. And what does that do? That means obviously fewer people, fewer children, fewer babies are being born, more being born out of wedlock. And that has downstream effects, not just for important sort of economic and policy reasons, right? Whether that's Social Security and other programs, but also very practical reasons, right? There are going to be a generation of kids who have no first cousins. There are going to be children whose entire understanding of family is going to be different, which means the family name, the family car, the family home, the family vacation, even the family reunion are going to mean something very different because they just have a completely different understanding of family. So this is not a reason to lose hope, but it is a reason to deal honestly with where we are compared to where we've been.
Yeah, and Delano, in my monologue for the show today, I reviewed some statistics, but let me just ask you, has this breakdown of the family, does it have some pretty serious adverse consequences for people?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the data are clear. So there's a connection between family structure and social outcomes. So if I could just put it plainly, the best, all things being equal, the best living arrangement in which to raise children is in a loving, low conflict, stable, and secure home with a married mom and dad. To me, that's the ultimate privilege, to be a child raised in those circumstances. And what you see is that children in those circumstances, right, in that family structure, tend to do better on a range of social and economic outcomes. So they do better in school, more likely to finish school, to go to college, to get better grades, less likely to be juvenile delinquents, less teen pregnancy, and certainly higher household incomes, because what you see is that married couples, this should come as no surprise, tend to make more and have more resources than single parents. So the connection between family structure and policy outcomes is fairly clear. It's just unfortunate that many of our elected officials would rather ignore it for, a host of reasons.
It's striking to me, Delano, just to talk politics for a second, that the left, the political left, they talk about poverty and they talk about all these social conditions and problems, but it seems like their solutions are always exactly the opposite of what really needs to be done, because they push sexual freedom, immorality, they denigrate traditional marriage, they push, homosexuality, abortion. Now, this transgenderism idea, you can be anything you want to be. I'm out here in Colorado, and I'll never forget when the Comprehensive Sex Education Bill came before the legislature, where literally the law of Colorado now is that the teachers in schools cannot make value judgments about any sex, like the sexual acts. Doesn't matter what it is. It's all the same and it's all valid. All that matters is if the people are consenting. It doesn't even matter whether you're an adult or not. Forget marriage, forget abstinence. This is the law of the land in our state now. Is this mentality of easy divorce, no fault divorce, free sex, free love, forget standards, there's no truth, it's whatever you want and whatever you feel like. Is that the root cause of these problems and something we need to begin addressing both in government and in other arenas of influence?
Yes, in one word, yes. My contention is that the policy outcomes that vex elected officials almost always start in the home, right? So what you see worked out in the schoolhouse, in the courthouse, and eventually in the jailhouse almost always starts in the home. So to your point, right, the family structure, the American family structure, that two-parent home, that two-parent model has been completely weakened over the course of decades. And in some communities, virtually destroyed, right? There's some particularly low-income neighborhoods where it is rare to find a man and woman living together as husband and wife, raising their own biological children. So I do think much of this is political, right? The people who believe that freedom is equal to license. So they say whatever it is that you want to do with your body or someone else's body is perfectly fine. And what that ends up doing is prioritizing the desires of adults over the needs of children, because children have a right to the affection, protection, correction, and direction of the man and woman who created them. And that right is best exercised in a loving, low-conflict home with a married mom and dad. But what we have done, we have inverted that relationship, and we say, no, adults have a right to live as they please, to do what they want with their bodies. And to the extent that children are produced from that, well, the children just have to bear the cost, and they just have to put up with whatever the adults want to do. So, yeah, the assault on marriage, particularly biblically defined, has been a decades-long assault. And 2025 is the 10-year anniversary of the Obergefell decision that legalized same-sex marriage across the country. And since then, we have seen, right, several other sort of downstream consequences from that. Yeah. One is the transgender ideology you talked about. But even in media, last year, within the first 2 months of 2024, I believe New York Magazine ran at least 3 different stories on polyamory, right? So the media is pushing this idea that every other family structure should be promoted. Even, I've seen stories where women will say, I blew up my marriage and left my family, right? I had a good husband and great kids, but I want to find myself. I want to find freedom. And these are promoted as, heroine tales like this. This is something heroic that this woman did.
Yeah.
But the minute that conservatives begin to say, "Hey, what about promoting the traditional family?" then we're called regressive and far right and Handmaid's Tale. So the culture war is real when it comes to these things, and this is why we need to continue speaking honestly about them.
And like, for example, just to put it plainly, one of the statistics that I saw is that children in single-parent homes, or specifically single-mother homes, are 5 to 6 times more likely to live in poverty than children from two-parent homes. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so the Dems for decades have been saying, well, fight poverty, fight poverty. Well, if you are serious about fighting poverty, maybe you need to stop pushing these ideologies that destroy the family. It's common sense, right?
Yes, and not just stop doing the bad things, but you can start promoting or at least making the connection between family structure and social outcomes, because you hit the nail right on the head. When you look at the data around household income, the order of from highest to lowest with respect to the 4 major ethnic groups in the country is the same as the order of marriage rates from highest to lowest. So you have it's Asian, white, Hispanic, and Black. So Asian American families, median household income is about $121,000. The lowest is for Black families, median income is about $56,000. What is interesting is that for Black married families, median household income is about $110,000.
Oh,
and for families for married couples under the age of 65, you add another 11,000. So for Black married families under the age of 65, right? So you're talking about generally 2 working parents. Their median household income is higher than for every other racial group overall, right? The married household income for Black families is higher than the overall household income for every other racial group. The problem is only 28% of Black households today are comprised of a married mom and dad, compared to about 47% nationally. So you hit the nail on the head. The issues that vex policymakers are less about discrimination and less about some of these other things, and it's more about family inequality. But for whatever reason, they don't mention that.
Well, Delano, man, I want to take that so many different directions. The first one is I'm thinking of Scripture in the book of Proverbs. It says, seek wisdom above all else. Get wisdom, and it says wisdom is personified as crying in the gates of the street. But you won't listen to me. But here it is, right in front of us. If I understand what you're saying, the cause of poverty and all these other things, maybe not all of them, but many of them in the Black communities is not systemic racism. It's the breakdown of the family.
Yes, I mean, to me, the evidence for that is clear, right? Yeah. It's the issue of family structure here in D.C., and this is actually quite timely. A representative from Wisconsin, I believe, held a hearing on crime in the nation's capital, and he was speaking to the mayor, Mayor Muriel Bowser, the city council chair, Phil Mendelson, and the attorney general, Brian Schwab, and he was asking them about what D.C. is doing to keep fathers in the home. And you could tell that none of these elected leaders was used to answering that question, because he asked about fathers and they responded about schools and mentorship programs and even child support enforcement and teen pregnancy campaigns. But it's one of these things where my sense is that no one in these administrations, and typically because Democrats don't talk about this stuff, no one makes that connection between family structure and social outcomes. So what I would love to be able to do is talk not just to these elected officials, but any elected official about making that connection. And I will say this, because this is a bipartisan issue. The last notable Democrat who consistently made that connection was President Barack Obama. He did it when he was running for president, much to the chagrin of progressives who supported him. He talked about fatherhood on Father's Day in 2008 on the south side of Chicago. He did it while he was president. He did it in his first term. He did it in his second term. He would consistently make the case that if we want to improve outcomes in many low-income communities, that we need to do more to promote and support marriage and strong families, and we need to do more to promote responsible fatherhood. So,
is it possible?
It's precedent.
And that's good. That's good. I appreciate that. But is it possible really to advance the cause of fatherhood and the traditional family structure without addressing the biblical issue of sexual morality and the standards for sexual behavior? Don't these things go hand in hand?
They do go hand in hand. Is it possible to address it? I would say it's possible. I'd probably also say that you won't get the maximal effect, right, unless you address this from a biblical perspective, which is why I believe that the way I put it is that if we want to save the home, we need to get 4 houses in order: the church house, the schoolhouse, the state house, and the art house, which represents religion, education, policy and government, and media and culture. Of those 4 houses, the church house, is by far the most important. So I think churches should be first and foremost, and pastors should be first and foremost, shepherding their own flocks about what God says about sexual morality, about the definition of male and female, about the definition of a family, and then from there, sending that message out into the broader culture. Do I expect everyone who addresses these issues and works to promote the family to be a 5-point Calvinist? No, I do not. I do not. But I do think that it is possible, and this is oftentimes the way things works in life, it's possible to benefit from living in a home, even if you don't know or acknowledge the architect who created it. So to your point, if we want to rebuild the family, we have to get back to a blueprint. I would say obviously a biblical blueprint, and we have to acknowledge the architect, the designer of marriage. Some people will never do that. That doesn't mean that they can't benefit from it. So I think it's a both and, but certainly I believe that the church has a role to play.
So I'm 100% on board with that. Have you done any or seen any studies or data about whether pastors in America today maybe have they stopped addressing these issues from a biblical perspective? Are they succumbing to the standards of the culture versus adhering to the standards of the Word of God, or maybe just neglecting the issue altogether because it's unpopular? Do you have any awareness of trends in that regard?
I don't have statistics to speak to trends. Anecdotally, I see pastors in all the camps. I see ones who faithfully preach the Bible when it comes to issues of family and sexual morality. I see some that completely abdicate their role. I see some that are far more interested in politics, right, and talking about the upcoming election than they are in addressing these issues from a biblical worldview. And then I see some who, in my opinion, have completely apostatized and just they have moved off of Scripture. There's a pastor, if I could call him that, in this area in Maryland, who has said that fornication, homosexuality, these are not sins. If you believe that they are, you're misinterpreting the Bible. So it's a mixed bag in America, right? When it comes to our houses of worship, it's a mixed bag. But I do believe that it is an important role for churches to play. And if pastors would simply preach the Bible faithfully and affirm God's design for the family, I think that will go a long way in planting the types of seeds needed to create a culture of marriage in our country.
So what impact has, I believe that also our culture is aggressively has for quite some time been trying to feminize men and to masculinize women, right? Men, you should be more like women. Women, you should be more like men. And any other narrative is considered, discriminatory. What has the impact been of this pop culture stuff on the mindset of young men in our country?
I think I mean, you hit the nail on the head in terms of the 60-year social experiment that we've been engaged in. So, with the rise of second wave feminism in the early to mid 60s, it did send the message to women that the height of femininity is to act, think, speak like a man, basically, right? To wear the clothes that men wear, to strike the power pose, to have sex like men, which in their mind is consequence free, which is how you contributes to the rise of abortion. And at the same time, it's to tell men that if you want to be a better man, you should act more like a woman. You have to get in touch with your feelings, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that I find interesting is that I recently saw a clip of President Obama on, Michelle Obama's podcast, the one that she has with her brother. And again, I gave him credit a few minutes ago. Now I'm going to criticize. What I saw is that when they read a question from a caller who was talking about raising a son and what she should do, and I noticed that when they talked about girls, the characteristics that they emphasized were leadership and independence. Mm-hmm. But when they talked about boys, they talked about, being more empathetic and in touch with your feelings. So I think the message boys are getting is that their very nature is problematic, mm-hmm. right? So the political left has gone from fighting sexism to hating masculinity. And then they turn around and ask, where are all the men? Because women don't like the type of men that feminists say men should be. So it's a vicious cycle where they're creating more young men who feels there's something wrong with being male, while then also demanding why aren't more men stepping up to the plate to be good fathers and husbands and so on and so forth. So I think we need to pull out of this tailspin at some point because we're headed straight for the bottom.
Well, and maybe we are beginning to pull out. I mean, I've seen some headlines that the youngest generation of adults, the Gen Zs now, are actually returning to church in really significant numbers, and that the men are doing so at greater rates than the women. So I don't know all of that, but it seems to me that they're rejecting this mindset. They're looking for truth and meaning and purpose, and they're hopefully finding it in God and in the Bible. What do you think about that? Am I overly optimistic?
Well, I would love to share in your optimism. I tend to be a skeptic somewhat when maybe it's the New Yorker in me when I see some of these early statistics. But I'm hopeful. I'll say this: I'm not a person that thinks about these things without hope. I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that the seeds that are planted in this generation would produce a good crop, 100-fold in future generations. So I've seen similar statistics that suggest the younger generations are sort of trying to bend the curve back towards sanity. As I said, I hope that's the case. I think the problem is that even within our politics, and we were talking about this a little earlier, oftentimes you get mixed messages. And the issues around family formation, and family structure are bipartisan issues. So while on the political right, we have people who talk about, creating a pro-family culture, there are also people, this is probably the Elon Musk wing, who are far more focused on having more babies. So they're pro-natalist, but not necessarily pro-marriage, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you have 14 children or however many children by 4 or 5 different women, it's clear that marriage is not a value. Babies are a value. And I think when you separate the two, you can end up running yourself into the same problem. This is the mirror image of what the left did years ago, where they said, well, marriage is not particularly important. And fathers are not necessary as long as the government is writing a check to the mom. And what some people, particularly after Mr. Musk's last baby announcement, were saying is, hey, it doesn't matter if he's not married to the mom. He's a billionaire. As long as he writes a big enough check, the mother of the child and the child will be taken care of. And I think that's a mistake that we don't want to go. We don't want to follow down that path.
No, because the greatest and the most important needs, human needs, are not material. They're emotional, mental, spiritual. And so, yeah, completely understand that. I want to make sure we get this in, Delano, but you were telling me before we went on the air that 2025 is the 60th anniversary of the Moynihan Report. Former United States Senator Daniel Moynihan was actually, you were saying, Secretary of Labor under Lyndon Johnson, wrote a report on poverty in the inner cities in America, and it coincided with a study and a report that you've published. Can you tell us about these two, and what are the conclusions from this?
Sure. So yes, 60 years ago, he was assistant secretary back then under Johnson. Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote a report. It was called "The Negro Family: The Case for National Action." It's come to be known as the Moynihan Report. And basically what it said is that the gains of the civil rights movement will not be fully realized because what he was seeing at the time was signs of distress within the inner city African American family structure. And what he considered a national emergency at the time was a 25% non-marital birth rate. So even at a time where the poverty rate for Black Americans was about somewhere between 35 and 40%, or it was 55% in 1959. By the mid 60s, it come down a little bit. So even when poverty was that intense, 3 in 4 Black children were born to married parents. But that 1 in 4 was a cause for concern for him. So he wrote the report. He said that the programs of the federal government should be focused on strengthening the Negro family, as he called it at the time. The report was met with much criticism from civil rights groups who claimed he was blaming the victim, from feminist groups who claimed that his use of phrases like a matriarchal culture and tangle of pathology made it seem like he was, blaming women. And it wasn't ignored, but it certainly was viewed as controversial. I would say the report was prophetic because what he said is that eventually the issues that he was seeing would begin to propagate themselves without sort of any external force, right? And as I said, now what we see is that nationally, close to about 70% of Black children are born to unmarried parents, and about 45% live with a single mom.
Wow.
So I wrote a report called Moving Beyond Moynihan, the subtitle of which is A New Blueprint to Revive Marriage and Rebuild the Black Family. And I go through what Moynihan said in his report, because now I have the benefit of 60 years to see what he was saying and what's come to fruition. I talk about some of the root causes of how we got here. One chapter is on the marriage, if I could use that term, between the welfare state, big government, and second wave feminism. And I conclude that the expansion of welfare displaced men from their rightful position as providers in their home. At the same time that the second wave feminist movement was attempting to convince women to rethink their relationship to their own bodies, to men, to marriage, to family, to children, and the home. And that was a culture shock to all American families, but particularly to Black families, because they were much more likely to be living in poverty and therefore more likely to be on aid at that particular period in time. So I look at Moynihan, I look at what happened in the 60s, I look at how this issue, particularly the decline of the Black family, has been accepted as normal. Mm-hmm. Elected officials don't say anything. I mean, elected officials don't address family, particularly if they're center left, they don't address these family issues in general. But I got to the point where I proposed a new blueprint. And what I said is, one, this has to be a priority for Black leaders first and foremost, right? Unlike 1965, issues of the Black family cannot be outsourced to white liberals. So they have to be led by Black leaders.
They probably couldn't have been then, too.
Agreed. The second is that this issue, and this is a general statement, a general recommendation, the issue of strengthening families and reviving marriage should be treated like the justice issue that it is. Because I argue that, again, children have a right to their parents, whereas no adult has a right to a child that they can't create on their own. So, we should address this issue and say that It's an injustice that millions of children across race are deprived of the benefits of living under the same roof with a married mom and dad.
Yeah. And Delano, just so we're clear, when you say married mom and dad, you mean biological male and female?
Correct.
Yep. Okay, go
Correct.
ahead.
Correct.
Go ahead.
Correct. So
I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going.
no. So I talk about reframing the issue. I talk about prioritizing the issue. I talk about using key institutions to create a culture of marriage. So again, I talk about the role of the church, the role of historically black colleges and universities, the role of state and local government, the role of media and culture. And then I also say that marriage revivalists must prepare and anticipate criticism from quote unquote allies. And what I mean is this: there are many groups that call themselves allies of the black community who will not be in favor of a marriage revival movement.
Like
So
LGBT.
LGBT groups will say that the biblical definition of marriage and family is far too restrictive and not inclusive enough. Feminist groups will oppose it for obvious reasons. They'll say you're trying to, control women. Abortionists will say the same thing because they realize that close to 90% of women who seek abortions are unmarried.
Yep.
So more married couples means less business for them. And then two other groups that I'll mention really quickly. One are the anti-racists, because for them, the focus should always be on quote unquote toppling white supremacy. So they don't look to any issue that requires agency on behalf of the black community. And then the final group are paternalists, big government liberals, who say the issue is not really family structure. The issue is that we don't spend enough money on programs for single moms and their children. So this is a totally different program than what Moynihan was recommending in the 1960s, because we're at a point where we have seen what has happened with changes in social norms, changes to public policy, changes to technology. So we have to, we need a new plan to address an old problem.
Well, Delano, it sounds like, you've just issued an indictment of left-wing policy from stem to stern. It sounds like to me. All of those groups, you said traditional allies, those are the constituents of the Democratic Party. That's what makes up the modern left.
Correct.
The only missing element is the minority groups, racial minority, right? And so you're saying, well, the problems that we're facing, it's not just racial minorities, it's all families in America, but racial minorities in particular, the solution is not the leftist Marxist approach and all of that. It's getting back to fundamental truths about how God made us and what his plan for us as human beings is. And that's my characterization. Tell me if am I on board with that? Am I right?
No, you're 100% correct. And one of the things that I said in my report is that I mentioned how BLM, right, Black Lives Matter, which I would suggest is by far the most significant movement that branded itself around racial justice or civil rights of the last 60 years. And it was a movement that was explicitly antagonistic towards the nuclear family. And it said as much in its Black Villages principle that started, we commit to disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure, right? So it was clear that if you get Marxists, right, self-identified Marxists, who are not in relationships with men, to lead a movement that is hostile to the family, that you're going to have bad outcomes when it comes to those issues. So one of the things that I've written before is that I would love to see traditional civil rights groups and everybody who says they claim about race, equity, and justice to put as much energy behind a Black Wives Matter movement as they did behind Black Lives Matter. Right?
That's awesome. That's awesome.
For whatever reason,
yeah,
they don't seem interested in that. But
yeah, well, so
there's still time.
So we've got a couple minutes left in the show, Delano. This blueprint you're talking about, of the first element of it is for Black leaders to begin to speak about these things and address these issues practically. But it's not just blacks, right? This is, all across all races now in America. I mean, there's, as you mentioned, the rate of unmarried pregnancies is high for whites now, and everything else is. But specifically, how do they do this? What kind of practical points do you have other than just talking about it? Although talking about it is essential.
Yes. So, and particularly when it comes to elected officials, right? Our elected officials can exercise authority in one of three ways. They have the pen of policy and legislation. They have the purse of taxation, funding, and programs. And then they have the pulpit, the bully pulpit, right, which is their public platform.
Yeah.
So when a president speaks, the media listens. When a mayor or governor speaks, and they transmit their values to the people under their leadership, then people are going to listen. So one simple way is for an elected official to say, hey, if they're talking about education outcomes or criminal justice outcomes, they can say, we're doing as much as we can as a city, but ultimately none of our efforts will be successful unless we address the most important institution, which is the institution of family, and unless we are able to ensure that more children are born into loving homes with a married mom and dad. You don't have to pass a single bill to do that. All it takes is the words, courage, and a little bit of political will. So I think part of it is that.
Yeah.
Cities can also, if they want to, even right now, run public awareness campaigns, right? Put up ads in subways, buses, billboards that say, give her a ring before she gives you a baby. In this town, we put marriage before baby carriage. I'm not saying it will change things overnight, but what it will do is start and change a conversation that is long overdue. And then from there, you can talk about different programs, programs for cohabiting parents with children, programs that helps couples who share a child but don't live together to be better co-parents. You can talk about the success sequence in schools, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do. But the first thing is to say that it's a priority.
Well, so folks, we're gonna get Delano's report that he's done, his study, and we're going to put that on our website and the resources page. Give us a couple days to get that done, and then you can come back and check our resources page. This is something that everybody needs to be thinking about and talking about. One closing comment on my part, Delano. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. never held office. He never passed a bill, never did any of that, but he changed the country by his words and by his leadership. So I think you're spot on here, sir, and I really appreciate your work and what you're doing. Wish you all the best, and please come back and see us here on Truth and Liberty. Everybody, please go to our website, pick up a copy of my book called The Calling to Manhood. It speaks into some of these issues, and be sure to tune in next time on Truth and Liberty. God bless you.